Welcome to a abnormal midweek edition of the First and 35 podcast. I'm your host, Gus Cousins, but you already know that, and I won't be talking for too long right now because I talked a lot earlier in the day. What you'll be hearing next is an interview that both me, myself, and I, Gus Cousins, and my former co-host Ben Jordan, who made a special guest appearance, did. We talk to our first ever guest on the podcast. You know him as Al's brother from Overdrive. He's the host of the Locked On Leafs podcast, and you can find him at Mickey_Canuck on Twitter. Michael DiStefano, who was here, he talked to us about a variety of things, hockey, football, Overdrive, and so we recorded that earlier today. But I didn't record an opening, so this is just me here talking about, what you're going to hear in the next few minutes. And yeah, so that's all I'll pretty much say for now. Have a listen. It's really interesting to hear what he has to say from someone who's obviously going through the same struggles during this pandemic as the rest of us. So, yeah, have a listen, and there you go. All right, welcome back to the First and 35 podcast. I'm your host, Gus Cousins, and I'm joined by two people today, excitingly. My ex-co-host, Ben Jordan, is back from his hiatus this week to join us, and we have our first ever actual guest on this podcast this week. Mike DiStefano, Al's brother. You know him from TSN's Overdrive. He's the host of the Locked On Leafs podcast, and you can find him on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. So thanks for joining us today, Mike. How's it going?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm doing well as I can be in times like these, but could be worse.
It's weird because now that there's no, not to state the obvious, but since there's no sports on, it's like, I feel like it's weird for everyone in that industry because like so much of our lives revolve around, watching sports and analyzing things and going over what happened the night before, that it's so almost foreign to us to sit back and just see that there's nothing going on at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just really weird, something that I want to get back to doing, like every single night instead of coming home and putting on the Leafs game, or right now I'd be watching the Jays be playing every single day and just not being able to do that. And I'm not getting my sports fix the way that
Yes.
I do. I'm having to find other avenues. So I've actually started collecting like sports cards again and just to get that sports fix into me. And the market right now is really strong, actually, believe it or not, because I think a lot of people are doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, I can totally picture that. Ben and I here, we both used to be like really big into like hockey cards and baseball cards, and I've actually sort of gotten back into it a little bit too, just because I've had all the time on my hands. So I'm like going through boxes and stuff and finding like, oh, I forgot I had these, and it's like, oh, it's kind of cool because there's nothing else really sports related to talk about or think about and all that. But yeah, so yeah, I can't wait. Hopefully. Obviously, the NHL season, comes back and baseball starts up and football can start on time and all that fun stuff. But speaking of hockey, which is where I guess we'll start, the Leafs signed a young defenseman last week, I believe, Mikko Lehtonen. So I just was wondering what you, because I know you talked about him on your podcast, but I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on Mikko Lehtonen.
Yeah, I think, he's not too young of a guy, 26, and he'll be 27 next year. But still, I think it's a good ad, a good depth ad. And from everything that I've read, he seems to be a player who can be versatile. He can play on both sides of the ice, which is, really good for the Leafs right now. If they can get a player who's comfortable on the right side, which he is. He came out and he said, like, yeah, I actually kind of like playing on the right side sometimes, which is really nice. He's a good skater. He can. He's kind of a two-way player. I think if you look at his stats, they're kind of gaudy looking, and you say, "Oh my God, this guy must be an offensive force," and he is. He is really good. I don't know if that's going to translate as much into the NHL, just because you have so much more space when you're playing out in Europe, but. Even still, I think the defensive side of his game, like he's rather responsible and can definitely carry some minutes in the NHL. Like he's playing 25 minutes in the K. And he led his team or led the D in points. I think he was fifth in the entire KHL in points too himself. But no, I think that he's really good. I think that he's a player who could come in and compete for some NHL minutes right away. It's not like he's a player like Calle Rosen or Borgman or one of those guys who came in and needed some time in the AHL to season themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that he's a player who can come in and kind of play right away. The problem here which I'm sure is going to kind of be the next question you ask is, now who's going to be the odd man out? Because
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
side, and now it's kind of stacked up. And, if he does end up playing the right, that helps a little bit. But it's still kind of, you got to think, okay, now if he plays the left, you have Riley and Sandin, but then you also have Dermott, and now this kid comes in. And then on the right side, if you do move one of those over onto the right, now you're thinking, okay, does that leave Liljegren out? So it's going to be an interesting scenario what ends up happening for like at training camp. Whenever training camp happens, I guess if we get the rest of the season, great. He won't be able to play until next year, anyways. But
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing either this summer or fall, whenever the off season kicks off. What they end up doing with their roster to kind of tinker with things, and maybe one of them gets moved. Maybe a guy like Dermott ends up getting out of Toronto and they flip him for a shot or some other youth piece. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I do like I like the addition. It's a good depth signing who can play some serviceable NHL minutes with a little bit of upside too.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that you mentioned, the Travis Dermott situation. Because now that you have Mikko Lehtonen, and as you mentioned, they're kind of loading up on guys to play the left side, and that'll end up in having, a couple guys being left out. And obviously young guys like Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren, they're so young that they're going to want to get them to play. And they've shown that at times they can be like, a good NHL defenseman. And obviously in Sandin, who a lot of people are high on, you're not going to be, scratching Sandin, I would think, at any point, just having him not play at all. So with the addition of Mikko Lehtonen and looking at, Travis Dermott as really, I think, the only defenseman RFA that's coming up, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see if they try and, get something for him and then let him go, because then, it's almost like you have too many guys for not enough spots. And, obviously Cody Ceci, we're going to assume, is kind of out of the picture next year, I would guess. Tyson Barrie, I would guess, is probably gone as well.
On that price tag,
for sure. Spots. Yeah, exactly. And then you have the fringe guys, you mentioned Calle Rosen, and then everybody's favorite Martin Marincin, who's still around. And yeah, so I think it'll be interesting just to see, because you're going to want to get these guys playing time. And I don't think Mikko Lehtonen will be going down to the AHL like you said either. He's 26, as you mentioned. He's shown he can be good. I would imagine he would slide right in there right away. And yeah, so I think it's going to be a bit of a crunch, I would say, on the defensive side of things.
That thing either, right? Like, I mean, even look at this season and how injury-raveled that D4 was. You lost Riley right away. Dermott missed the first 6 weeks of the season, and that was supposed to be your 1, 2, 3. All three of your top three defensemen on the left side all missed some significant time this year. So, it's not bad having that depth, even if you do have to end up sending Lehtonen down to the minors just because a numbers thing. You want to keep Dermott in the fold if you can get him signed to a cheap contract this summer. It's not a bad thing, because I can guarantee you there's going to be injuries and you're going to want to have that depth, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have to call up Calle Rosen or Martin Marincin to play, more than 15 minutes a game.
Yeah. I was just going to get to, what do you think a realistic contract would be for Dermott? Like, what do you think they would look to get him on?
I would personally rather get him on a pretty short-term contract.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I wouldn't go any more than a year or two. Probably give him a 2-year deal, only because that'll allow you to have him available in the expansion draft if need be. Just kind of one of those guys that they'll have available, I guess. So, maybe give him a 2-year, $3.5 million or something like that. 2-year, $4 million.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be that expensive. I've heard some people saying, "Oh, he's a $3 million defenseman." He hasn't.
No.
Really I don't know why there are some people writing out there saying "Oh, he's going to be expensive," which is why the Leafs are going to give up on him. They just won't be able to afford him. I'm sorry. Are you watching the same Dermott I have? Because I haven't seen a $3 million defenseman. I mean, does he have that potential? Sure, but has he proven it to me yet?
No. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big thing, right? And I know it's the same in every sport, really. You have to, what you think of the player, what you think Travis Dermott is worth versus what you think everybody else would pay for him. And then you kind of have to throw that together and say, is it worth, as you mentioned, signing him to a 2-year deal, which it probably would be, because depth is always good, like you pointed out. But yeah, it's going to be weird, I think, whatever happens in the future, whenever the NHL gets going again. for the Leafs in particular, just to see how they, play around with these guys and who plays when, who plays where, sort of thing. But the other NHL thing I wanted to get to was, speaking of it, the possibility of the NHL returning within the next couple months or so, or the idea of it. And then the other thing that came out was that the drafts, I forget who pointed it out, but they're still looking at possibly having the draft in just over a month or so away from now. To me, I'm no genius, but to me that seems like it would be an incredibly weird situation, because it would kind of take away all of the lead up to the draft, such as, the trades and whatnot, and it would kind of take, a little bit of the hype away from it almost. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, the idea of getting the draft going in a month or so from now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that's the biggest worry that everybody has. Like, I've talked about it extensively on my show. Overdrive talked about it a lot. The part that I love most about trades, and that a lot of people love about the draft, I'm sure you guys also, this is a big part of why you like to watch the draft, is because those are when some of the biggest trades go down, and that's kind of why a lot of us really get into it, because I'm not, as familiar as most people are with whoever was taken, 28th overall in the draft. Like, to be quite honest with you, I probably have watched maybe like one game of them at some point in their career, so I really am not too familiar with the players. However, I do enjoy listening to the analysis, but at the same time, I'm just waiting for a big, the shoe to fall for a big trade to happen. It's a lot of fun that I truly enjoy every single year whenever Bettman comes up. He's, we have a trade to announce, and I'm always what the trade is. And if we don't have that opportunity, then I'm just not going to be as invested in the draft as I otherwise am. The other thing too is what do these players who, because we don't even know yet. I think in order to fully decide if you're going to have a draft or not, you have to decide if you're going to be playing in playoffs or not. And if you decide that you are going to be doing a playoffs, it's going to be 8 teams, it's going to be 16 teams, it's going to be 24 teams. I think all these decisions have to be made before you put a final decision in whether or not you're doing the playoffs beforehand or not. Because another big thing is, what do you do with all these draft picks that were exchanged for, rental players at the
exactly.
Like a team like Vancouver, who traded, Tyler Madden, a pretty good prospect, and a second-round pick for Tyler Toffoli. They expected to get, a good run out of Tyler Toffoli, not, 6 or 7 games. And for them, if they're going to lose out on a second-round pick because of this pandemic, I don't know if they're going to end up figuring out if they're going to end up giving these teams who traded draft picks for rentals, if they're going to end up giving them some sort of compensation, like compensatory picks, later in the round or in the following round, or what. But I think that there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done in order for them to have this draft, and I wouldn't want it rushed. So I don't think they should have it at the beginning of June. I don't see a point in having it at the beginning of June. I understand that the NFL draft went off without a hitch, and it drew really good numbers, which is probably what they were seeing. But it's two totally different things. Everybody knows people in the NFL because they've been watching college football for so long. The NHL, there's really only a handful of guys who really, really follow and study the CHL and know the players drafted in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. You know what I mean? A lot of these guys are playing out in Sweden or out in Russia, and unless you know where to find them, you can't even find tape to scout these kids. Whereas, in the 6th, 7th round in the NFL draft, you've been watching them for years, and exactly, you can find their stuff on YouTube pretty quickly and pretty easily, especially the big school guys. So I don't know. I personally wouldn't want to see it. I would rather them just either finish out the season or decide that, okay, we're not going to go forward with this year, it's canceled, and then proceed with the draft. Because I want to see that player movement, and I don't want them to rush things and kind of leave out some details.
Yeah, and I think, another big thing is that I know you mentioned they would probably, look at the NFL draft and say, well, it got good ratings, it went off pretty well. And I'm sure even a month from now, obviously sports, whenever they get back, are not going to get back to, the way they were before, at least not right away. So in my gut, I'm probably thinking that the NHL might be looking at the NFL draft and saying, that was really the only live sporting event, if you want to call it that, at that time. So then if the NHL thinks, well, if we have like a monopoly, let's say, over those couple days of the NHL draft, that they could probably be like everyone would pay attention to them, is what I mean. And I think I don't think that's a good reason to do it, like you said, because it would be rushed. Things would have to get sorted out. It would, as we've mentioned, take away the entirety of, trades leading up to it and, the drama that unfolds inside of it. And I think that would be another big thing. And I mean, I do agree completely that they need to figure out this season and then worry about everything else later. And I know you don't want to off-put stuff because then it gets backlogged and then it becomes even tougher. But right now, in today's world, let's say, I think, like you mentioned, the Canucks, for instance, a lot of teams are going to have individual questions that they're going to want to have answered in terms of, how things are going to get back. The MLB, not to get into the MLB right now, but, they put forth their talk to the Players Union, I think today at lunch it starts, about, the possibility of making a deal and getting back in the field. I know that's more of a money thing. But in terms of NHL teams saying, like you said, we traded for X player, we gave up a lot for him, and now what, we only get him for a few games? I think it's going to be a very long process for the NHL to go through team by team and figure these issues out. And yeah, I mean, I'm just as excited to watch the NHL draft as, many other people. I know my co-host here, Ben, had a bunch of stuff he wanted to ask you about, the draft and all that. And I don't want to get too much into it because I know we don't want to waste too much of your time here. But yeah, so in terms of the draft, obviously Alexis Lafreniere now is at the top. Everyone kind of assumes that. But then after that, many different people have many different ways of looking at it. So I was just wondering, even if it's, let's say, the top 5 or 6, what your thoughts were on, the top, at least, of the NHL draft.
Yeah, I think the top 2 definitely going to be Lafreniere and Byfield. I've been a big watcher of Byfield since before he even got into the OHL. I remember when he with Simcoe, the Simcoe Express.
Yeah, the Express, yeah.
Yeah, I got wind of him at a buddy of mine who scouted in the OHL, and I was talking about Jack Hughes before he got drafted. I was saying, oh, how good this kid is. And he said, you think Jack Hughes is good? Look up Quentin Byfield. And he was like 13 or 14 at the time. So I went and I looked him up, and I was like, holy cow, I can't believe this kid. He's so big, so skilled, and so young, and ended up going number 1 overall in the OHL draft as expected. And then if it wasn't for Lafreniere being, exceptional, he would have been number 1 in this draft too. So you have a really, really, really strong class at 1 and 2. So I think Detroit and Ottawa, either one, if they end up with the top 2 picks, I think they're going to be happy with those selections, regardless if they get 1 or 2, because I think they are closer than a lot of people think. Honestly, I don't think it's much.
I know.
I don't think it's. Yeah, go.
Sorry, I think the World Junior performance really changed a lot of people's perspectives, and I don't know if Byfield gets. I think he gets critiqued a little too much for his play at the World Juniors as it's just his first year. And if you look at Lafreniere at the World Juniors last year versus this year, there's a huge jump, and I think we could see that with Byfield next year.
Yeah, and I think, too, you just have to look at the positions. Like, center is a much more valuable position in the NHL, and if you could play center, if it's a 1A, 1B, you got to go with the center. Now, I do think that Lafreniere is more skilled and the better player, that I would go with them. They're not completely tied, but it's not like a foregone conclusion that Lafreniere is 100% like the number 1 player in this draft. I think you could make an argument that Byfield is good enough and plays a more premier position that you could justify taking him number 1. I wouldn't. I would go Lafreniere, but I don't think it's a huge gap like some are perceived to be. On top of that, I think there's a couple of really good players. Jamie Drysdale, right-hand shot from Erie, really high on him. I'll be curious where he lands. I think he should go
top 5 for sure.
Yeah, I think top. Maybe he might fall out like the top 6 or 7, but Tim Stutzle, really good player. Marco Rossi, he had a heck of a season. Jack Quinn did nothing but score goals. Like, it's going to be a really solid draft throughout the entire top 10. Like, even I'm going to be excited and curious to see where Yaroslav Askarov ends up going. Didn't have a great years, but he was touted as the best goaltending prospect since possibly Vasilevsky or Carey Price. So I'm going to be curious to see where he ends up. Does a team decide to take him early where his skill set lies, or because he's a goaltender, does he kind of slip and fall a little bit, and does the team get a steal, kind of at the midway point or maybe even in the 20s in the draft because of that? I don't think he will, but I'll be curious to see where he ends up. Strong draft, especially in the first round, for sure.
Yeah, actually, I had just two questions about sort of draft order that I wanted to get to, and they're really just based on Craig Button's rankings. I don't know if you've seen those, but I saw he listed Cole Perfetti at 4. I was just wondering if that seems a little high for me. I mean, obviously really good offensive upside and really good talent, but I just think there's more NHL ready players at 4 that you could get other than Perfetti.
Look, Cole Perfetti, I've talked to Craig about this because even dating all the way to September when he put out his initial rankings, been big on Cole Perfetti this whole time. Like, he's very familiar with Cole Perfetti. And, Craig's an outstanding gentleman. He knows hockey. Like, he's not at the TSN building. He's in a hockey rink. Like, he lives, breathes hockey. So who am I to challenge?
Yeah, no, that wasn't a challenge at all. Totally just your opinion.
Yeah, no, and I totally get it. But I think that he could be a top 5 player for sure. I think once you get past the top 2, there's probably 5 or 6 guys where they're just in that cluster, right? So talk about these clusters, and they could go anywhere depending on team need. And a goal scorer like Perfetti, I mean, who doesn't need more goal scoring, especially if you're one of the bottom teams in the league? So I could totally see him being a top 5 player.
And another question. Sorry, go, Gus.
Just one thing I just wanted to mention. So you mentioned, I know, Tim Stutzle, who's up there, and he's just probably, I'm less or so knowledgeable on, the NHL draft than probably a lot of people are right now, because I don't follow it as closely. But in terms of Tim Stutzle, he's a name that I've seen go up and down, obviously not low, but up and down quite a bit on different people's rankings. And that it interests me in any league when, somebody says, oh yeah, he could be really up there in like top 4 or something, and then you go to see another list from someone else, and then he falls down to, I think the lowest I saw him was somehow at 8 or 9, and I don't remember who that was that made that list, but just to see that drastic, improvement and decline up and down people's lists. Obviously, Tim Stutzle was a great player, and there's no doubt about it. But it's just weird, in my opinion, to see, guys go up and down rankings so much, especially the top picks. I just thought that was one of the weirdest things I've seen this year in the NHL draft.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons for that, I think. I think you look at, overall, a player who plays he's in the German league, isn't he, Tim Stutzle?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, when someone's coming over from the German league, it's not the best competition, you could say. It's good that they're playing in a men's league, because that means that he can, go up against NHL-ready bodies, which is something that is always a concern when you're talking about players playing in the CHL or in the USHL, which they're all playing against against players who haven't filled out their bodies yet, and that's always going to be the case. When they fill out, are they going to be able to stack up against NHL-ready people? You don't quite have that question when it comes to players who are already playing in men's leagues, which is a big reason why a lot of European players have a little bit of a leg up, I think, in times like that. Then again, you also have to factor in the fact that the ice surfaces are different in most arenas over in Europe, so it really depends. But a guy like Stutzle, I know I've had a few people on my podcast on Locked On Leafs to talk about the draft, and Stutzle is one of those players where they're really bullish on. Tony Ferrari is a guy who I've had on a few times, and he's really, really bullish on Stutzle. He thinks that this kid's going to be an absolute star. He believes that he's the 3rd best player after Lafreniere and Byfield. I personally, again, like I said, there's a cluster of 5 or 6 players after those top 2 where they could go anywhere depending on need. But I could see a player like Stutzle certainly, again, being a top 5 guy. I think that he's really skilled. He's a really solid player. And we'll see where he ends up. But I think that he certainly does have the skill to be considered a top 5 pick.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, they're all interesting, right? Because every draft ever really, you're talking about, everyone is, I mean, talking about a player's future, and they're all just kids, right? And it's in the NHL, it's more than most because you look at these guys, 18, 19, 20, some of them. It's it's always fascinating to me to see, any analyst in any league or whatever sit down and be like, I think blanky blanky, can be an absolute star, which I know a lot of them do turn out to be. And that's why analysts are so great, because we hear their opinions and we hear, they have the insight and all that. I just think it's really interesting to read, the little blurbs about these guys that say, oh, blanky blanky, who's like 18 or even younger, like in the O or whatever, say, oh, this guy can be like the next, Sidney Crosby or whatever. Not to that extent, but something along those lines. And I just think it's funny to see people talk about, these young kids who haven't even gotten out of high school yet, and talk about them, as these next level great studs in these different leagues. And I just thought that was a very interesting thing that I know all leagues do it and there's business for it. I just think it's incredibly interesting to read about these young kids because no one really knows who they are yet outside of, how well they play. So that's just another thing that I think, this draft may take away from if it happens this soon, where teams are going to be scrambling, I would say, because you don't know for sure when it's going to happen. And I think that'll be another, problems will arise from that. So I think I don't know, it just seems like there's a lot of possible problems in terms of getting this all done all soon and quick, as opposed to waiting it out and letting, the details fall where as they may.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of problems too, and one being the fact that the OHL and junior hockey itself didn't get a full season, right? Like they didn't end up getting their playoffs. There was no Memorial Cup, and a lot of times you see some late risers because they have a solid playoff in their draft year or a good Memorial Cup run in their draft year, and that's kind of what separates them in these clusters that you have somewhere, between a 6 and 7 player group. It's a kind of, you look at, okay, what was their playoff performance when they were playing in the big games, when they're playing under pressure against the better teams, and you kind of decipher based on those games sometimes who's the better players. But they didn't have that. So scouts are kind of just going to have to go based on regular season, and they're not going to have those big time performance players and that you would kind of that you would kind of take during the playoff games. And so it's going to be interesting too when you factor in the fact that they didn't get a full season of scouting under their belts either.
Yeah, and speaking of, all these seasons being shut down and all that, recently the NFL released, it's the full schedule for all the teams, and there were a lot of things that were pointed out. Obviously, the New England Patriots, and they're falling, so to speak, in the AFC East. Somebody else pointed out that, now that Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay, that Tampa Bay has 5 different primetime scheduled games. And then the follow-up on that is that the new Las Vegas Raiders have 4. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, I know you tweeted out, I believe, like you're high on the Buffalo Bills, or correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that you're high on the Buffalo Bills. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on like the new shape of the AFC East in the NFL.
Yeah, obviously with Tom Brady leaving, that division's now up for grabs for the first time in 20 years. Like, in all honesty, I guess you could say that the year Matt Castle had to play for Brady when he got hurt was another season where it was up for grabs, and I think Miami ended up winning the division that year, actually, anyways. But for the first time, it's really going to be an all-out gunfight for top spot in the division. And, I mean, don't sleep on the Patriots. I don't think that they're tanking for Trevor like some people are saying just because they didn't draft or go out and sign a quarterback. It's still Bill Belichick. And Belichick, he's got a couple of things up his sleeves. Obviously, Stidham learned for a whole season under Tom Brady. I'm sure he picked up on a couple of things, and they would have watched him in practice playing. And obviously they believe that he is good enough to play quarterback in this league. Jarrett Stidham, when he first was at Auburn after his first season there, like he was a highly touted prospect, and he just never really turned into being the top level quarterback that everyone thought he was going to be when he came out of high school. But maybe something finally clicked when he got to New England. The playbook, the offense that he's working in, maybe that just he prefers to play that style over what he was doing at Auburn. Just the tutelage of Tom Brady and Belichick combined helped him get to that next level in his career. Like, I don't know. We're going to have to see what happens with him. But I'm not ready to write them off just yet. I know a buddy of mine, or a couple buddies of mine, we were just having like some Zoom beers the other day and chatting, and they ended up making a bet. The over-under was set at 7.5 wins. One took the over, one took the under, and they got a couple $100 on that. And I was like, that's a good line. Like, they asked me, what line should we put? And I said, probably 7.5, because I can see them winning 8-9 games, but I can see them also just squeaking out 6 or 7 games. It's really going to depend on how Stidham plays, but that defense is good enough to win 6 games, even if Stidham's not electric. Looking, down the rest of the AFC East, I think the Buffalo Bills did nothing but get better this offseason, adding Stephon Diggs, another new weapon for Josh Allen. I think that's going to be huge. They got Zach Moss in the draft to line up with Devin Singletary. They added A.J. Epinesa as well to kind of help with the run defense. He's a versatile guy who can come off the edge. He can also go inside if you need. Ed Oliver is going to be another year older, and then Trey White, it just keeps getting better and better. And I think they added Josh Norman, who didn't have the best season last year, but if you look at hit the best seasons of his career, it was when he was playing with Sean McDermott when they were in Carolina. So maybe he can reawaken Batman, and Josh Norman can have a great season. Overall, I think that they're one of the most deepest complete teams in the entire league. But again, it's a quarterback-driven league, and it all comes down to the fact is, can Josh Allen take that next step and lead this team, not just to the playoffs, but lead them to playoff victories and on a deep playoff run? And it's going to have to be because Josh Allen did it. And that's just what the NFL is in 2020. And it remains to be seen if he is an elite quarterback or not. But I think this year 3, this is kind of when you have to make that leap. Miami, they got a little bit better. Obviously, Tua Tagovailoa injured to start the season most likely, so I don't think that we're going to see him right away. It'll probably be the Fitzpatrick show again.
Yeah.
But they got much better, I think, also on defense. They added Cal Van Noy from the Patriots. They added Byron Jones in the secondary from Dallas. So I think that their defense got a lot better, too. They had a bunch of draft picks, too, to kind of reinvigorate and build up the depth of their team. They traded for Matt Breida, who's a really good running back, I think, coming from San Francisco. So I think Miami also has a chance to surprise some people. I mean, they won 5 games last year, and that team sucked. Like, on paper, they were awful, and somehow
they were brutal. I've been a Miami Dolphin fan for really my entire life, and I have lived through some really bad teams. Even in the Ryan Tannehill era when we thought he was our savior, and he obviously wasn't. But last year I went into it, and after that first week against I want to say Baltimore, I think, where they just got absolutely annihilated. It was just so depressing to watch as a Dolphins fan and see, oh my God, this is what's coming the entire year. And then they managed to squeak out those, they looked much better at the end. But yeah, that was just so ridiculously painful to watch these last couple of years, these Dolphins, who are now, it's nice that they're getting better, but I think they're still, a little bit of ways away from, reaching where they want to be.
I think Devontae Parker took a really big step last year, too, becoming a really good wide receiver. I think for a while he kind of had bust on his resume. It seemed like he was heading that way at least. And then last year took a really big step, and hopefully that continues, and he can be a number 1 receiver that they desperately are going to need for Tua. I also think, imagine that they didn't trade Minkah Fitzpatrick. I wish that they kept Minkah because he's an outstanding player. And when they traded him away, it didn't do it for me because they ended up getting, I think was that the pick that they ended up taking Austin Jackson for, I believe?
Yeah, I believe that was the pick, yeah.
I'd rather Minkah Fitzpatrick over Austin Jackson. I mean, I know that the O-line is something that they need to shore up, obviously, with moving out Laramie Tunsil, but I just think that they probably could have gotten another guy, with that 26th pick, which they ended up moving back and taking another player. But I just think that they could have done a little better. Maybe even Jackson would have been there at 26, but I think that if you look, it's obviously in hindsight, it's easy to say, but I think Minka, if you put him on that team now, that looks like a much stronger defense. But
yeah, Minka. Sorry to interrupt. Minka when he went to Pittsburgh. I think that was just about halfway through the season, around there. And then, he just lit it up for them, right? Leading right into the end of that year, the second half of that year. He just balled out and he played ridiculously well. He played the way that Miami thought what they were going to get from him, when they originally drafted him. And I completely agree. I think, especially in terms of Devontae Parker, he was forward last year, and obviously, but yeah, I think it's great. It's Devontae Parker took that step. I think even as a fan of Minka Fitzpatrick, even though he doesn't play for the team anymore, I think it's great that he goes to Pittsburgh and then he just completely, he takes over the defense. Really, he was so good for them. And yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. Sticking with the theme of football, though. Jumping just very quickly to the CFL, I know, we have this whole pandemic thing that's going around everywhere. But Randy Ambrosie, there was a report about the possibility of this CFL season just being a complete washout. Along with, I believe they had their draft a few weeks ago, the CFL draft, I mean. But it would be so weird to see, the entire CFL season just wiped out. And I have no idea how that'll affect, the season after this, if this season is wiped out. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, what do you think the chances are that this season, the CFL season, will actually go off?
Very low. I'll give it maybe a 30% chance, we're giving a Jerry's percentage there. 30% chance that we see the CFL season happen. I've talked to a few people who I think are quite knowledgeable with what's going on in the situation. And the problem with the CFL is in order to go on, I believe that they are going to have fans in the stands because a lot of the revenue comes from the gate. So if they're not having fans and just because of social distancing and restrictions not being lifted, if they can't have them by, let's say even best case scenario September, I don't think that they're going to be able to go forward with the season. They'll lose their shirts, unfortunately. I know that they've asked the government for some money, which obviously will help. And at the end of the day, I think they probably are going to really need that to sustain business operations long term, or they might have to kind of halt operations for a little bit. That doesn't mean that they can't come back and kind of restart things and pick up where they left off. But obviously that's something that they don't want to have to do, which is why they've reached out to the government for some help. But it's not looking good. I'll be honest with you guys. It does not look good that we're going to get a CFL season this year, barring any drastic changes to the way that we're going about the whole COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and I know obviously, money is the big factor here, right? Because you're losing money by not playing games, two, not having fans in the stands and all that. And then as you mentioned, talking to the Canadian government to try and get, money to, put forth to see if we can get the season going. And I know we all remember in recent history, the big upheaval with the XFL, right? It started off so good. And then, unfortunately, it just bottomed out because they didn't have the funds to keep things going with the pandemic going on. And I'm not suggesting that the CFL will, bottom out like that at all. I'm just saying the XFL was a very, very, a fun start. And then it was very disappointing to see, at least in my opinion, because I love the whole league, to see it just fall out right away. And yeah, I think it'll be, it's too bad. I know there's absolutely no other way to look at it because, money is what runs things. And obviously the safety and the well-being of everyone in every league anywhere is of the utmost importance. It's the first thing on everybody's list. I just wonder, let's say the CFL season doesn't happen at all, so it's just a washout. How that would affect things the season after that almost because of the amount of revenue that just no team got, that just they couldn't build up because it's a full lost season. And, they gained so much money from all these different teams around Canada, even with the players and, the draft that just happened, how that'll affect them. And I know it's a lot of questions, and I know nobody really knows the answer to any of them. But it'll be tough, just like every other league right now, to figure out what will happen once, this pandemic starts to pass, and then eventually when a vaccine gets out. But jumping just to a more casual question almost. I know you mentioned just briefly their jury percentages. Both Ben and I, we probably far too much obsessively watch Overdrive. We love the show and all that. But one of the questions we have for you was, we're all stuck in quarantine right now. What is Al's brother's favorite underrated Netflix TV show that he has found during this quarantine?
Underrated? Huh. Good question. Like, I've watched so much TV. That's really all there is to do nowadays. Honestly, just sit there and just pound through Netflix TV shows. Man, I don't know if I go with underrated, but like a show that I really, really enjoyed, that I really, really recommend to everybody, which most people probably have already seen it by now because it was really the talk of TV for like a solid week there, talk of Twitter. But like, if you haven't watched Ozark yet, definitely give it a try. I didn't watch the first 2 seasons when they came out, and then season 3 came out, and I saw everybody talking about it. I was like, all right, let me give this show a try. Whipped through all 3 seasons, and I kid you not, probably 4 or 5 days. From like the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed was just binging this show, and I went through like a season a day. And it was so good, guys. Like, it's such a good show. And the 3rd season, the way that it ends is it's epic. I don't know if you guys have seen it or not, but I think it's great written. I love the way that it's written, the way that it's shot too. But then I also watched, what's that other one that I did see? Oh man, I'm blanking. Outer Banks? Have either of you two seen Outer Banks?
Oh yeah.
Yes, I just started watching that yesterday, actually. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a big one.
Yeah, really good show, actually. I didn't think I was going to like it so much. I thought, maybe it's kind of like a teen drama type thing, kind of like a Riverdale, and I was going to lose it like that. But man, it was like captivating. I watched it again, like within 2 days, just kind of cranked through the whole thing. And it was really, really good. I enjoyed it a lot. So I would say those 2 shows, and Tiger King, if you haven't seen that, watch it.
Yes. The infamous Tiger King that continues to, break the internet. Yeah, I have seen. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries, man. It's just buck wild. Absolutely wild.
Yeah. So I started watching Outer Banks. I can't speak for Ben here because I don't know what he watches, but I started watching Outer Banks. Ozark is also on my list. One show, and I know we're getting way off topic here, but one show that I actually would fully recommend to anyone is it's on HBO. The Outsider. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's the Stephen King one, and I think there's only 10 episodes or something, but it's so ridiculously well made, and Ben Mendelsohn is in it, and he's, I think, the lead. And it was just ridiculous. I think that I blew through that in like maybe 2.5 days. And considering there's 10 episodes, I feel very unhealthy about doing that. But it was great. Yeah, and I know we're all stuck inside, and that's all we could really do is just binge TVs and TV shows.
Yeah, that's it.
One final question before we let you go, and thank you for being with us today. I know we've taken up a bunch of your time, so thank you for being here. One last question. On Overdrive, so the character arc, I would say, of Al's brother has been around for quite a while. I was wondering if, even in general terms, you could just describe how Al's brother became who he is today on the show.
Man, honestly, O-Dog. I owe a lot of my, I guess, success so far in my career to O-Dog. I don't know if you guys saw like the first time that I was on TV or not, but I guess it's back a little bit further than that, just kind of me chiming in randomly. I guess kind of started a lot with the NFL picks. I would say was kind of where I started, and then I somehow ended up going on for, I think it was Jerry's Percentages one day for Mike Johnson. He was doing an interview with like Van Vliet during the show. He was supposed to do it during like a TV break, and it ended up extending, and somehow I ended up getting the call up and ended up kind of doing the show, and I guess I impressed well enough that he wanted me in there for, one more horny hot take at the end, and then I also did the line hit. I banged him out 3 for 3. So that was impressive. And so I got to come back and do it again the next day. And I guess kind of since then it's been uphill, which is good. It's unfortunate. And I was having this conversation with Noodles. We did like an Instagram live, and he was saying like he's seen, I guess, how comfortable and how much better I'm getting on air and stuff, throughout the day or throughout the year, and he was saying it kind of sucks that this pandemic kind of put a stop to it, because it's like both you and the Grappler are in your quote unquote rookie seasons with the show, and he felt like we both kind of got stymied a little bit due to the pandemic, and which is unfortunate. I can only imagine how actual athletes feel halfway through their rookie seasons. Guys like Quinn Hughes, Jack Hughes, Capo Caco, such as that, halfway through their rookie years, and they're getting stopped midway. So I kind of, it's not quite the same, I'm sure. I feel their pain a little bit there, but no, honestly, it comes down to O-Dog, man. That guy's always pushing to get me on the show. Even if, during the quarantine, like I'm not really working that much, but he's always pushing. He's like, oh, let's give Al's brother a call, and randomly just give me a call, check up on me, see what's going on. So I everything, all my success is honestly just because, got a good relationship with the boys, and they love to hear from me. They think it's hilarious. I guess, I guess the fans also think it's rather funny.
Oh, it's amazing. From an outsider point of view, who we actually absolutely love the show, it's great. The first time that you, as you mentioned, filled in for Mike Johnston, it was hilarious. And I know it's not even real praise, because I'm just some random 17-year-old here doing the shtick. But it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'm not a comedian by any stretch of the imagination. I never thought. Why is it such a funny phenomenon? I'm curious.
Well, I think mostly it's because, you have the three guys. You have Brian Hayes, who you obviously know, the three guys. But every time, it was almost like, to use the representation of the David Ayres situation, right? Somebody, I don't want to say being thrown in unprepared, because obviously you do your podcast. It's great. We all love it. And you're obviously very, very talented on air and everything. But I think it's mostly just when something happens out of the ordinary on that show, that it riles everyone up on social media. I don't really know why either, but it's just great. It's hilarious.
Yeah, it kind of just gets its own legs, and it's got a mind of its own sometimes. Once Twitter gets a hold of things, Twitter and Instagram, that's game over. It ends up just becoming a thing, and that's what happens.
One final thing, I just thought I'd mention it because we're on the discussion before we let you go, is so when Ben and I were actually first coming up with this podcast, and obviously we binge Overdrive just way too much, every single day. I actually thought, if we're starting a sports podcast and watch Overdrive, I thought, on Instagram, I'll direct message Brian Hayes just to see if he had any advice for us. And I didn't think he would actually respond to any of it. So I had my hopes very low. But yeah, he was actually a big help. He responded and just, gave us some helpful tips on, how to talk and how to get started and all that. And the one thing he made very clear, and we see it all the time on the show, is that he told us to be very self-deprecating 100% of the time. And I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, no, Brian's a good dude, and that's awesome that he you reach out to him. You don't expect for people who you see on television that you look up to, I guess, if you guys are both aspiring sports journalists, you don't expect for heroes, I guess, to reach out to you like that. So it's great that he did. I would listen to Brian, man. That guy, he knows what he's talking about. I've learned so much just by being there, whether it's just, watching him in action while he's, just getting through the show, the way that he handles some situations, the way that he handles, O-Dog sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think self-deprecating is a really good one, because that's really what they do on that show a lot. You gotta always kind of go with the flow, have some fun. They take jabs at me all the time, and I know it's fun and games, and it's all just, it's a good time being on that show. It really is. And the three guys, they're awesome dudes. And Grappler, Malls, I think we got a really good group of six guys on that show, and I can't wait for us to get back in studio so we can all be together again, because it's been a boring, lonely couple of months not being around in the TSN studios and not being on the show every day.
Yeah, and I'm sure I speak for like every fan of the show out there. We all can't wait for one, sports to get back, and two, for you guys to get back in studio so we can see, the evolution of Al's brother become even more prevalent as the weeks and the months and the years grow on. We'd like to thank you so much again for taking time out of your day to come talk to us. I know we're a very low end sports podcast on the list, so we'd like to thank you so much for that. And yeah, you can find him as the host of the Locked On Leafs podcast. You know him as Al's brother on Overdrive, and you can find him on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. So thanks for coming on, Mike, and we hope you have just a great rest of the quarantine life until life can get back to normal.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
And so there you have it, our first ever guest interview on the First to 35 podcast. We thank Al's brother, Mike DiStefano, quite a bit for taking time out of his day to come talk to us over Skype. I know parts of the video, the audio wasn't overly great, but hey, it was a learning experience for everyone. Super nice guy. He's the host of the Locked On Leafs podcast. You can listen to that wherever you find your podcasts. Great conversation with him. He opened up on his opinion about a wide variety of topics, as you heard, the NHL, the NFL, yada, yada, yada. Great interview. We thank him again so much for taking the time to come talk to us. Maybe, just maybe down the road, Ben and I can bug him a little bit to come back on for a second rendition of it, but we'll have to wait and see about that. So there you go. Hopefully you found it interesting. And yeah, I guess you'll be hearing from me next Sunday.